Hi, welcome to the Stories Beside channel. Enjoy watching. Thomas, thank you so much. If it weren't for you. The young mother looked with tear-filled eyes at the doctor who came out to see them off. Come on, Adriana, why are you crying? You can not only positive, and nothing but positive. Everything is all right. Thomas, everything is fine, only thanks to you. Adriana wasn't lying at all. She knew perfectly well what would have happened in the first place had it not been for Thomas. She understood and was even more frightened by the realization, and even more grateful to him. Well, come on. We made it through. Adriana's husband handed out flowers, candy, to the staff, and then approached the doctor. Thomas, you know what you've done for us. I would like to give you a gift from the bottom of my heart. But since you don't accept gifts as a matter of principle, I've decided to give a gift to your department. I have heard you say that you are very short of equipment and laboratory, and that is why you have to wait for some tests for a long time. There's a car parked on the porch. You just give me instructions on where to unload everything. I think what's there will help you. Thomas looked at the patient's husband in surprise. He was, of course, aware that these people were not simple, not just wealthy, but very, very wealthy. They happened to be in their maternity hospital, just passing through town, returning home from a vacation, and Adriana went into labor. Yes, so precipitous that she just wouldn't make it 30 kilometers to her hometown big city. My husband, after asking passersby where the maternity hospital or any hospital was, drove the car. He broke all the rules that exist and arrived in the courtyard of the maternity hospital, accompanied by 2 police cars, which loudly demanded that he stop. However, when they saw what was going on, they helped him first and then gave him a bunch of tickets. Everything was so dangerous that they had to act very quickly. Adriana and her husband had been going at it for a very long time. I had to do IVF. The pregnancy was difficult. That's why they went on vacation. Everything was wonderful on the vacation, and Adriana would have loved to stay again. But 7 months is a long time. That's why they decided to go back, but they didn't make it. Thomas hadn't performed such a complicated operation in a long time. Everyone who had any problems tried beforehand to go to a bigger city where there were no problems with equipment or doctors. The doctor went outside and saw the car. He turned to Adriana's husband, who was carrying an ornate baby in his arms. Are you serious? It's worth a fortune. Nothing can compare to human life. I think you'll agree with me. Thomas hugged the man and then Adriana in a sort of impulse. Do you have no idea what you have just done? Thank you. Grow up healthy. 2 weeks later, the hospital had a new lab. Of course, he had to write more than one explanation for not begging patients for this equipment. Why did they even decide to donate everything to the hospital? But those were just little things. Now Thomas could do the most complicated tests there, which usually had to wait from another city. And sometimes 1 extra day without treatment was like death. Thomas had been working at the maternity hospital for more than 10 years. First, when he came to work in this city as a young professional, he was invited to the women's clinic. There he worked for 5 years. Even then, he was considered a competent specialist, and it was quite difficult to make an appointment with him. And now, as the main person to meet new lives, he was in charge of appointments at the clinic, and complicated pregnancies were referred to him. All would be well if it weren't for one thing. Thomas and his wife, Abby, had no children. That's the way it goes. As the saying goes, a cobbler without a shoe. They tried not to advertise their problem. They had a very small circle of trusted friends. They never went to any corporate parties to avoid being questioned. Abby just didn't want to talk about it because the problem was personal, and Thomas was willing to put up a whole wall around his wife to shield her from unpleasant conversations. They married when Thomas was in his senior year. Abby was so gentle, so humble. She came to study from a small village. There's nothing wrong with that. Abby was no different from the city girls, except she was a little kinder, a little more sympathetic. But Thomas's mother didn't like Abby. Helen was sure that her son had a great future ahead of him. that he would never stay in the hole her husband had once brought her to. All her life she'd been waiting for them to get out of here, but her husband left this world early, and Helen had no one to count on. Moreover, the woman had to go out to work, something she had never done before. Things got a little easier when Thomas went to school and got a part-time job. Then Helen quickly wound up her work activities. You've got to hand it to her. When her husband was still alive, he managed to save a pretty decent amount of money. She didn't touch it. She just sold the deposits. The interest kept her afloat. When Thomas came home and announced that he was introducing his mother to his fiancée that evening, Helen immediately suspected something was wrong. How could it be? What fiancé? And what about the career she had pinned such hopes on? Surely some bitch had just decided to take her son away. Of course, the bitch doesn't seem to be stupid to know that Thomas is going to be a luminary. Well, no, he's gonna be a shining light for her. Let the rest of them go to hell. Thomas. Who is she? Where'd she come from? Who are her parents? Thomas waved his hand. Mom, who cares? Father seems to be a tractor driver, and mother works on a farm. Helen clutched her heart. What tractor driver? What farm? Her son is out of his mind. Did he bring a milkmaid into their house? Or rather, he's going to. That will never happen. On the farm. Where are the farms around here? You mean the ones with the cows? Thomas sighed. He knew a scandal was about to break out. No, mother is on a poultry farm, and not here, but in the country. Helen spoke in an almost whisper. Are you saying that the girl you decided to bring to our house is from the village? Helen said the last phrase suspiciously calmly, and that meant only one thing: she was furious, and that furiousness would sooner or later begin to come out of her. Did Thomas take a breath? Well, first of all, she's not a girl, as you put it. A very nice girl, polite and well-mannered. Secondly, not bring her in, but bring her in to introduce you. But if you don't like the idea, or if you want to have a concert tonight, I don't have to bring Abby. We'll just get married quietly. There you go. So you don't care about your mother. Your mother's opinion means nothing to you. Mother, how can it mean anything when you've laid down your opinion without even seeing, without knowing the man? And I do not need to see. I already understand that the village predator has decided to deceive you. Only you as a calf do not understand it. You should watch a couple of soap operas instead of your medical encyclopedias. They had a big fight then, and that evening Thomas didn't bring Abby out to meet him. They applied to the registry office and thought they would get married quietly, but it wasn't to be. Helen found them, found the apartment where they lived. It was just before the wedding. Abby had just started a house cleaning job that day. The place was a mess. When the doorbell rang, she wasn't expecting anyone, and no one even knew they lived here, so she assumed it was the neighbors. Abby opened the door at once. She was not at all used to always having to close up. It was not customary in the village. Hi. She looked at the woman who was literally drilling her with her gaze. Another second, and Abby realized who it was. Her legs immediately felt cotton. Thomas was hiding nothing from her, and she was well aware that the future mother-in-law was not here to exchange compliments. Well, hello there. It's all right to come in. Her mother-in-law continued to stare at her, and Abby stepped back in confusion. Yes, of course, come in. Only then did she remember what was going on inside, but it was too late. The woman was already pacing the apartment. Helen glanced around the room and muttered, "Not surprised. It's like a barn, like a country barn." Abby flashed, "Why do you say that?" "It's just that I'm having a general cleaning, and I wasn't expecting guests." She knew it sounded a little harsh, but she couldn't help herself. "You're being rude, aren't you? Do people usually warn you if they're going to have guests? So you're saying I should tell you if I'm going to visit my son? Maybe I should also ask your permission." "No, you don't have to ask. But in case you haven't noticed, Thomas isn't home. He's at work." Helen walked around the room, scrutinizing everything. "And you're not at work. You're sitting on my son's neck, dangling your feet. What do you think? How long is he going to last like this? Abby tried to pull herself together. It's my day off. There was a long pause in the room. Well, you're just going to stand there like that. You could have offered tea. Abby didn't want a scandal, so she quickly went into the kitchen. Anyway, she would have to meet her mother-in-law. She would have to talk to her, even if not often, like the other daughters-in-law. So it was necessary to try at least somehow to smooth the edges. In the kitchen was already cleaned up, one might say, cut out. So she breathed a sigh of relief when she saw Anna Vasilievna at the door. Well, at least there is nothing to complain about. Come, please. Here, you can take a seat on Thomas. Helen also looked around the kitchen, not at all embarrassed, looked in the refrigerator. It's not much. From such a mistress. My Thomas will be dead in no time. All right. I'll go. Abby was confused. What about the tea? I'll drink it at home. You might not have any sugar, or you don't know how to make tea. I'm pretty sure I don't. Abby went after her to show her out. On the threshold of the apartment, the woman turned around. You know what I'll tell you. You should go back to your village. We say where you're born, you're welcome. And Thomas needs a good girl, not a leech like you. And Helen just walked out. Abby cried into the evening, and then started to pack her things. When Thomas came home from work, she was ready. Where are you going? Abby looked at him and sniffed a red nose. So no way my mommy figured us out. She nodded, and the tears came flooding back. So who are you going to marry? Me or mommy? Thomas, you don't understand. She spoke to me with such contempt. He hugged Abby tight. I don't know what to tell you. I'm sorry about Mom, but I can't do it without you. Abby didn't go anywhere. A week later, they got married. Helen was also invited to the signing, and then to a cafe, where a few of the closest people gathered. But she never came. Peaceful family life did not work out anyway. From time to time, my mother-in-law showed up. It was as if she could sense when Abby alone would always show up unannounced. A couple of times, Abby would pretend she wasn't home. Then Helen would start calling the neighbors and asking how they lived, if her son had gotten such a wife. The neighbors looked at her that way. Some of them would just shy away. Abby tried not to say anything to Thomas. He was just starting his career, and Abby just didn't want to upset him. So 3 years went by. Abby got very thin, almost stopped smiling. Thomas saw that something was going on with his wife, but what couldn't he understand? He tried many times to talk to her, but she was rebuffed. Thomas, it seems okay to you, doesn't it? Once when Abby was on her way to work, she got sick. She didn't even make it out of her yard. Abby sat down on a bench and leaned her head against her knees. At that moment, neighbors from downstairs walked by. Look, she's been drunk since this morning. Bad luck for the man. Tell me about it. She looked like a decent woman. Abby jumped up abruptly. She wanted to explain to them that it wasn't like that, that her mother-in-law was just trying to drive her out of the world. But she didn't have time. She fainted and collapsed right at the feet of these neighbors. A man bent over her. Hey, don't you dare sleep here. You'll freeze to death. Then he turned to his wife. Look, I do not smell booze, and in general she does not look like an alcoholic. My wife sat down next to Abby too. What are you standing there for, Michael? Call an ambulance. Abby woke up in the car. She immediately saw the very same neighbors, tried to sit up, but from somewhere behind lay a hand on her shoulder. Lie still. Where to run with such pressure? Abby lay down and suddenly burst into tears. The neighbors looked at her in amazement. The doctor shook his head. You can't bring yourself to such a state. Why don't you think of yourself at all? Abby turned away. The neighbors did not leave her, which was very surprising to her. After she took the tests and sat down in the hallway, they came up to her. Abby, you'll forgive us, Helen. Apparently your mother-in-law. Abby nodded her head. She didn't like me. I can see that now. She's just so persuasive. Is she the reason you're like this? No, I don't know. I'm getting used to being shunned. Why doesn't your husband do anything about it? Abby looked at them frightened. I don't tell him anything. It's his job. What does it matter what his job is? You have to tell him everything. It's out of the question. Gloria, her neighbor, was very indignant. She too had a mother-in-law, but she treated Gloria like her own daughter. And the only one who ever got hurt was her son. Abby stood up. A nurse came up to her. Here you go. You need to go to the antenatal clinic right away. It says it all. It's 9 weeks. Low hemoglobin, low blood pressure. Anyway, go now. They're the only ones who can treat pregnant women. Pregnant. Abby looked so dumbfounded that the nurse asked, didn't you know? Aya? I didn't. Then congratulations are in order. Abby smiled. Yes, thank you. The nurse was about to go. Then she said, you know, there's a young doctor at the women's clinic. Does he have your last name, by the way? You should go to him. He will definitely help. He's a good doctor. Abby smiled even wider. That's my husband. Husband. Strange. Why is he so inconsiderate to you? The nurse left. The neighbors rushed to congratulate her. Abby, would you like me to walk you out? No, thank you very much. It's just around the corner. She sat in front of the door to her husband's office and imagined his face. Come in. A nurse looked out of the office. Abby stood up, walked into the office. Thomas was writing something. He raised his head and stood up in surprise. Abby, what happened? She silently held out the papers to him. Thomas looked and sat down. Read them all. Jumped up again. Abby. The nurse tactfully withdrew. Abby, is this? I don't even know. I can't put my condition into words. Don't worry about your health. We'll fix it. The two of them took care of the pregnancy as best they could. But even though Thomas was a doctor, it was going badly. Thomas himself didn't look his best from worry. From time to time, Gloria ran to Abby. They had much in common, and somehow they became fast friends. They even laughed occasionally, remembering their acquaintance. Gloria was tactful not to tell what her mother-in-law had said about her, and Abby didn't ask so she wouldn't get upset. Helen showed up when Abby was already 5.5 months pregnant. Abby might not have let her in, but her mother-in-law was waiting for her in the yard. She immediately fixed her eyes on Abby's belly. She was visibly a little confused, but she quickly pulled herself together. I see you found a way to pin my son down tight. It's not going to work. Thomas will still find a nice girl who's right for him. And we'll take the baby away from you. Just so you know. Of course, a child is better off with people who are well-mannered and educated. That's not you. You know that. Abby came close to Helen. Tell me, why do you hate me so much? What have I done to you? Abby was on the verge of a nervous breakdown. Helen looked at her contemptuously. It's a lot of honor to hate you. You don't deserve it. It's just that you broke my plans. I had very different plans for my son. If it weren't for you, he'd be a professor by now and living in the capital. You're the village. You're dragging him down. He doesn't develop around you. Her mother-in-law abruptly turned and walked away. Abby felt a drilling start somewhere in her back. A savage pain. She struggled to get to the door, opened it, and collapsed. The pain was tearing her from the inside out. Abby crouched down, wrapped her arms around her stomach. Please don't leave me, please. I love you so much. The pain was getting worse, and her consciousness grew dimmer and dimmer. Abby was up and down again. She felt like she was being carried, then carried. Somehow everyone was bustling around, making noise, which really disturbed Abby, and also disturbed the baby crying that was in her head. Abby tried to drown it out, but it wouldn't stop. It was very distressing. She knew it was her baby crying. She didn't know how much time had passed. Abby woke up. It was very quiet, so quiet it was scary. There was no crying, no nothing at all. You are here. You are with me. She carefully lifted her hand and placed it on her stomach. There was no stomach. There were some bandages, something else. But what she was looking for was not there. She wanted to scream, to run, to find. Abby tried to get up, but a nurse was there. She instantly gave Abby a shot, and she fell asleep. Abby voices Thomas, the son of the woman she lost her baby to. She doesn't want to see him, and neither does she. She doesn't want to see anyone else in their family at all. Abby opened her eyes at first vaguely, then more and more clearly. She saw her husband. Abby, my girl, everything is going to be all right. Nothing else is going to happen. Go away. Thomas looked at her with that look. I understand everything you're feeling right now. It's hard for me too. I lost a child too. Thomas, go away. Please go away. I don't want to see you ever again. You hear me? Abby screamed as hard as she could. There wasn't much of it. But they heard her. Just a second later, a doctor appeared in the room. Thomas, please. You know yourself that it's going to be like this at first. Your wife needs rest. Thomas stood up. Of course, he understood everything. Abby didn't know everything yet. She didn't know the main thing he had already been told. She couldn't have any more children. They wouldn't be able to. He hadn't yet fully figured out what had happened. Why had it happened at all? He went straight to her. He walked out of the office with the doctor. Charles, what happened anyway? Well, you see, according to the tests, nothing could have caused the miscarriage. I'm inclined to think it was a nervous shock. Only a very severe shock would affect the body that much. Nothing happened to you. No, it was business as usual. I went to work. Abby was going to go to the store. She wanted to see the stroller. Unless there was something outside. Whatever it was, something had happened. And nothing could be changed. The next day, Charles met him. Thomas, I'm sorry, but I can't let you see my wife. Why did she ask me not to let you in? Categorically. And she also asked the nurse today to see if she could file for divorce while she was in the hospital. Thomas looked at his colleague and couldn't believe it. It couldn't be. Why? Abby was always very calm, sensible. We have nothing wrong, if that's what you mean. But I have no right to interfere in your life. But you know I can't let you through. Abby, on the verge of a nervous breakdown. The only thing I can advise you, even though you know it yourself, bring the gear, make her feel your presence, your care. Thomas was well aware that Charles was right, but it was very hard to accept. He came every day. Nothing changed. One day he was told that Abby had been discharged and her parents had taken her away. Thomas was walking home. He was so confused. On the stairs he met Gloria. Thomas, as Abby he stopped. I don't know. Abby is divorcing me. She left Gloria's eyes rounded. She couldn't take it. But that's not surprising. You know, Thomas, it's very unkind of you to let your wife be bullied like that. He looked at his neighbor in surprise. Gloria, what do you mean? I have never in my life. I don't mean you. Then what do you mean? Do you even know that before all this happened, your mother came again, my mother Thomas again? Do you see anything other than your work? Your mother Thomas listened to Gloria, and his knees buckled. How could it be? How could he not see anything? He knows his mother very well. Thomas excused himself and ran down the stairs. He had to go to his mother. Helen opened the door and smiled, son. Thomas never forgot that he had a mother. Every once in a while he would come over and bring groceries, but he never stayed more than half an hour. As soon as the conversation came to Abby, Thomas would immediately say goodbye, so as not to quarrel with his mother. Mother, is it true that? Son, come in. I was just about to have tea. Mother came to see Abby. You came by 2 weeks ago. What did you tell her? Helen pressed his lips together. She complained. Thomas sat down with his arms around his head. Mom, you're the one who lost the baby. Do you have any idea if your grandson is dead because of you? Mom, I will never forgive you. Never. Do you hear me? He jumped out into the street, stopped. Thomas didn't know what to do. He just didn't understand. In the morning, he drove to the village where Abby was from. He was not greeted kindly. Abby's mother stood on the doorstep behind her father. Why did you come? Donna. Edgar, I understand that you all don't want to talk to me, and you are quite right. I am a bad husband. I should have noticed, I should have, but I couldn't. I thought we were doing fine, that we were doing great. I'm not leaving without Abby. If I have to, I'll live outside. I love her. I'll never fall out of love with her. No matter what happens, I will ask her forgiveness for as long as it takes. Abby's mother wiped away Thomas' tears. She doesn't want to see you. She doesn't want to see us either. Edgar stepped forward. Dana let her daughter resent us. But I believe that if anyone can talk to her, it's Thomas. In a minute, Thomas was standing in front of the door. He drew in air and pushed the door open. The conversation was hard, so hard that Thomas was about to give up. But he held out, and Abby finally cried. They sat, cuddled together, all night, talking and being silent. Enough years had passed since that day. Helen finally withdrew her money from the bank, bought a house in the nearby suburbs, and left. Thomas couldn't bring himself to call. He realized that his mother was just kind of cut off, and that was it. In his already long practice, Thomas had seen all kinds of things. There were those who gave birth for the 5th time and just didn't pay attention to the birth. There were those who were afraid and because of that simply could not give birth. There was a more interesting contingent. Just a few weeks ago, a woman was brought into the hospital. Thomas immediately smelled a heavy stench. Have you been drinking? The woman smiled. What about Fred, my man's birthday? So, you're having a baby. You're pregnant, women chuckled. So pregnant, not sick. Don't worry, doctor. I'll give birth and go home. Maybe they'll still have time. There's enough for 5 days at home. Then he'll definitely stay. Thomas already knew that this woman had had 3 births. Who are your children with? They're in the care of the state. The state is there to help people. Thomas put the papers aside. So all your children were taken away from you, and you decided to have more children. No, I didn't decide anything. It just happened. Look, I never said that. Maybe you should just give up the baby right away. Especially since, according to the chart, he's going to have problems. The woman got scared. The doctor won't do that. I need him to live with me at least a couple of months, so I get all that is due to me from the state. I give a man to the state. Let him pay. This woman had a baby girl. She was very pretty, but she had a lot of illnesses. The child was transferred after 3 days to a children's hospital. And the mother, of course, refused to go to bed with the girl. She said that as soon as she was cured, she would come and get her. Thomas was disgusted. He really hoped that she would be deprived of her parental rights before she had time to formalize everything and before she finally killed the child. He came home that day and just sat on the couch, sat down, and was silent. Abby looked out of the kitchen. Thomas, is something wrong? No, the laborer. I had my 4th baby. Giving birth benefits, processing, and that's it. Then to the state. Why does God give children like that? Abby sat down next to me. She didn't say anything either. In general, they tried not to bring up the subject of children. It was hard on everyone. Thomas, a nurse, looked into the office. Come on, hurry up. They're demanding you. Demanding someone's been brought in. No, there is such a thing. Thomas did not understand anything, but realized that he was needed urgently. He went down to the waiting room and was a little stunned. At the table sat a pale nurse, an equally white nurse, taking a pregnant woman's blood pressure. On the couch sat an elderly woman. Thomas had only seen ladies like that in old movies, all dressed in black, in furs. The most important thing that caught his eye. They were huge gold rings, worn over black fishnet gloves. On either side of the woman stood 2 ambassadors. Thomas had no other words for such young men. Big ones in black t-shirts, with a holster over them, and not an empty one. What's going on here? The woman looked at him. Are you a doctor? Yes, I'm a doctor. Why is there a stranger in the waiting room? The lady stood up. Leave us all alone. The men gently took the stubborn nurses under their arms and led them out of the waiting room. Thomas was no sooner indignant than the woman raised her hand. "Listen to me, young man. I am the mother of a man everyone in this town knows about, but no one has seen. Anyway, my son is the black side of town. A year ago, he had to leave temporarily. And while in this town, I'm in charge. My son is very powerful, very rich. But most importantly, he's very violent." It was she who pointed her hand at the pregnant woman. "She is my only granddaughter, the daughter of my son, and my dead daughter-in-law. As you understand, if my father finds out about this, I will not be able to bear my head, and Elizabeth will be punished. I don't even want to tell you what he might do. My little girl must be born so that not a living soul knows her name, knows nothing. Minimal staff. Better yet, just you in a private room. Our people will feed her and clean her up. All that is required of you is a healthy child and a healthy granddaughter. I'm sorry, but that breaks all the rules. After all, I need some kind of tests, maps, anything at all. How am I going to deliver a baby? It's all there. I'll give it to you for review, but I'll take it right back. No records are to be kept, so no one can dig up anything later. Do I make myself clear?" Thomas didn't know what to do. "No, I won't do that. In fact, I'm going to call the police." The lady looked at him and smiled. "That's your right. Can you try it?" The man went to the phone, and at that moment the head physician entered the emergency room, accompanied by the same kind of bumpkin he had seen before. "Thomas, do as this woman says. Will last 5 days." He didn't understand anything. But if the chief physician gives the go-ahead, he will do whatever he asks. Only one thing was unclear: if people were so tough, couldn't they find a doctor to deliver the baby at home? Which, naturally, I immediately asked the lady in black. She grinned sadly and handed him some papers, and apparently it was a kind of chart. Thomas turned to the pregnant woman. "How are you feeling?" The girl smiled, pulling. "Nurse, back to me." The lady only turned toward the door as the 2 nurses who had been here before appeared in the office. "Blood pressure, pulse, contraction rate." "Thomas, how do I record the patient?" "Not as I do myself later." The girl nodded and began fussing near the pregnant woman. The other helped her, and Thomas himself deepened his reading. After 5 minutes, he looked up. "Have you lost your mind? Do you realize that you just might not be able to save any of them? Thomas, before we came here, we checked you out. You're the best doctor in this town. And if anyone can fix this, you can. She can't even have a baby." "I know. Don't yell. If I could, I would certainly turn back time, but I can't do that." He thought frantically about what to do. She had to be taken to the capital. She couldn't. That was where her father was now. Someone would be sure to get wind of it. He examined the girl. Her blood pressure was very, very low, her heartbeat weak. He knew what would happen to him if something went wrong. That something would go wrong. He was sure of that, too. The girl had a seriously diseased heart, but he couldn't leave her without help either. "Get the oar ready. Get the cardiologist for me," the lady said. Thomas turned sharply to her. "Look, I'm asking you not to interfere. When I work for you, it's all about secret games, and for me, it's all about human lives." Seconds. 5. The lady looked at him with an icy gaze, then backed away. "I'm sorry." She walked over to the girl. "Elizabeth, everything will be all right. I promise you." "Grandma, I know it's going to be okay." Is this the first time Thomas has ever had an operation like this? No, of course. He'd been to one back at the institute, but it was performed by a professor. And it wasn't here. Thomas had more modern equipment at hand and absolutely zero practice. After 3 hours, it was clear they had won. It was complicated. The girl had to be resuscitated twice, but they managed. Thomas went outside. He rarely smoked, maybe 5 times in his life, but now he felt an unbearable urge to do just that. He turned around, looking for someone, and immediately a pack was handed to him out of the darkness. "Thank you. and give me one." He even jerked around, and there was the lady standing next to him. They lit a cigarette. Thomas looked at her with interest. Yes, she was holding herself like a queen, and no less so. Alive. She did not look at him. But Thomas could sense how much fear was in that one word. Alive. The woman seemed to deflate. Immediately smaller. Her shoulders drooped, as if a great weight had fallen from them. The child was alive too. "Beautiful, beautiful girl." The woman turned to him. "When can I see her?" Thomas wanted to answer that the visit is only during certain hours. But I remembered that today was a very special occasion. "I'll observe in 3 hours, but I think it will be possible to move her to a room." "A private room, yes, take me there." He sighed and opened the door. He didn't even have to say anything when the two Muslims with large bags followed him. 5 minutes later, a woman of about 40 appeared in the room, changed the linens on the bed, made a capsule for the baby. The woman sat down, showed him to the chair. There were no new births, so Thomas sat down. He was interested in this older woman. "My name is Charlotte." Yes, that's the name. And I realized that everything that's going on today is out of line with Elizabeth's father, and he's been dusting her off all of her life. Her mother ran away from my son. No one ever saw her again. He loves Elizabeth very much, but in his mind love is a little different than what we think of. When he left, I had a hard time convincing him to leave the girl with me. He was just cutting off her oxygen. Julian looked for a clinic, looked for a doctor who could help her. But everyone refused. There's no cure for this kind of thing. She was predicted by doctors to leave us as early as 15. You have no idea what it's like to live knowing that your tiny, your most beloved girl is going to die soon. It's also very scary to look at her and realize that she knows it too. Julian is having a very hard time. He thinks that if he keeps his daughter close to him, if he never lets her go anywhere, he will keep her safe that way. He refuses to understand that he can't do anything. He doesn't understand that Elizabeth's life will be very short. We need to let the girl try to enjoy everything in this world. It's clear that she won't have time for everything, but at least something. Really, I didn't think we'd have that. Elizabeth has a daddy character, and she didn't tell me who the father was. I could find out, but then Julian would find out. I'm not afraid of him. I don't want him to lock Elizabeth in the same room. Well, how will you hide the baby? Oh, don't worry about that. There are enough people in our house who will agree to say the baby is theirs, like the cook or the maid. I do the staff. That's why Julian doesn't get involved at all. What's next? There's nothing next. When it's next, we'll decide. Oddly enough, Thomas really liked the old woman. There was something so ironclad about her, but she was still a real lady. Charlotte spoke the correct Russian language without muttering the words. She had the right accent. In general, she was a real model, a real woman. The next day, Thomas was back on duty at night, leaving the unusual room for later. Charlotte greeted him as if he were her own. "Will you allow an old woman to call you that?" Thomas smiled. "What kind of old Charlotte are you?" "You're as good as any young Charlotte." She laughed softly so as not to disturb her granddaughter who was asleep. "Thank you, of course, for the compliment, but you flatter me." The woman sat him in a chair, handed him the papers. "These must be some kind of measurements for you, right?" "Thomas, I've looked at them all carefully. There was a cardiologist, wasn't there?" Came in, sighed, shook his head. Thomas, "Tell me, is it bad?" He was silent for a while. Then he nodded his head. "Pregnancy has taken the last of your granddaughter's strength. Childbirth has only accelerated the process even more." Charlotte walked over to her granddaughter's bedside. She just stood there looking at her. Thomas suddenly felt physically how bad she was now. She came back and sat down in front of him. It's very hard to lose children. But now I think it's even worse to lose grandchildren. What am I talking about? Thomas, do you have children? Thomas said no, shook his head, and then spoke. He never told anyone his whole story. But this woman wanted to relieve her soul because even with Abby, they couldn't talk about it. It was too painful. Charlotte must have known how to listen, because he told it all. Thomas felt so incredibly relieved that she even breathed easier. Thomas, forgive your mother in your heart. Forgive her. It's not her fault that she was born that way. Every man has something in his soul that he believes in. She's gone, and so be it. Abby, you're smart. It's not easy for a woman to forgive. Many live only for revenge. No, Abby's not like that. She's kind. She is. That's good. People with anger in their souls don't get anything in the end. And good people do. Thomas sighed. I don't believe that. Why should we? Let not us. Let Abby get nothing more than anything else in the world. She wants a child, but there will never be one. You don't know that for sure. Life sometimes surprises you so much that it makes your hair stand on end. Thomas smiled. Whatever the case, he was relieved. He also realized that he needed to love his wife even more. A couple of days later, Elizabeth and her little girl and Charlotte were leaving the hospital. Where are you going home? For now, yes. Tomorrow my son is supposed to come. He will take Elizabeth abroad. There's a clinic that's willing to try. They honestly say it's a long shot, but we have to make the best of it. What about your great-granddaughter? Well, we'll hide her for a few days, and then we'll take it from there. Good luck with that. Thank you, Thomas. I really want you to have a good change in your life, too. He walked the family back to the car, already a familiar bunch of musclemen. I wonder if they even know how to talk. Turns out they could. When everyone was seated, one of them, Thomas, came up to him. Yes, he looked surprised at the man who was a head taller than him. Here's a little present from Charlotte. The man held out the envelope to Thomas. I'm sorry, I don't need it. I don't take money. The man grinned. First of all, it's not money. And secondly, you know you can't refuse. It's not that kind of thing. Have a nice day. The man put the envelope in his hands and got into the car. The two jeeps drove out of the hospital grounds almost silently. Thomas stood a little longer and went inside. He remembered the envelope only when he was on his way home. He found it among the papers on the table. He put it in his briefcase and left the office. He had to go to the flower store in time. Today was their wedding anniversary. The mind-blowing smells greeted him already in the entryway. Thomas smiled. So Abby hadn't forgotten about their anniversary either. He opened the door. It smelled exactly as good from their apartment. Abby, I'm home. She came out into the hallway, all dressed up and so pretty. Thomas, have you forgotten? Of course not. I feel like we're having a real party tonight. Wash your hands and come to the table. Abby went into the room with the flowers. They were sitting, reminiscing about their acquaintance, and Thomas suddenly stood up. Abby, I had completely forgotten. Remember when I told you about Charlotte? Well, you never forget. Imagine, one of her attendants gave me a present today. You know I don't take it. They didn't give me much choice here. They're not used to hearing no. Wow. What is it? We'll take a look at it together. I haven't even opened it yet. He went into the hallway and got an envelope. Look, he said it wasn't money. Abby carefully opened the envelope, and Thomas poured them more wine. Thomas. Abby's voice sounded strange. It wasn't. Thomas, it's the deeds to the apartment. They gave you the apartment. He walked over to his wife. How? Thomas didn't just look dumbfounded. He was in shock. Abby can't be. You're not wrong. No, see for yourself. That's how they lived on rent. Saving up for everything. Saving up, but they still hadn't saved up for an apartment. It was kind of weird. The more they saved, the more expensive the apartments got. But Abby and Thomas were not discouraged. There was already hope that in a couple of years they would finally buy something. Thomas carefully studied everything with the seal and the notary. Everything is as it should be. It just couldn't be. Abby looked at him. Is there such a thing as a gift? As you can see, look, there's a note. They unfolded the piece of paper together. Thomas, accept this humble gift. You deserve so much more than what you have now. It's Charlotte. That's what she used to call me. Abby stood up. Thomas, do you realize we have our own apartment now? Honestly, I have a hard time. What are you standing there for? Let's go. Where's Abby going? Thomas, that way home. An hour later, they were at the place. Once again, checked the address of the second floor. Thomas inserted the key that was in the envelope and the lock clicked softly. Abby gasped. Thomas, was the apartment a two-bedroom renovation perfect? Do we really have our own place? Thomas, there was a pregnant woman brought in after an accident. Thomas dropped the coat he was holding. He was on his way home and ran after the nurse. The woman was pretty banged up. Thomas quickly examined her. There were no serious injuries, abrasions, bruises, and minor cuts. He might have missed something, of course, but he'll figure it out as he goes along. The question as to why he was brought here, it just fell away. The woman was pregnant with twins, and the accident had induced labor. For a while she came to her senses. Thomas asked loudly how far along she was. 36 weeks. Okay, getting the woman ready. The nurse looked at him. Operating room or delivery room? Let's go to the delivery room. We should at least see if she can do it herself. 10 minutes later, Thomas commanded to the operating room quickly. This was an operation he would never forget. The children were on edge. So was the mother. Thomas struggled. At the glass door to the operating room, all the hospital staff crowded together. 2 hours later, he was finished, and when he came out, his colleagues applauded. He waved his hand in embarrassment. Oh, really? Thomas, you know perfectly well that with such indicators very rarely it is possible to save both mother and children. Well, now more often. A few hours later, he was informed that the children were safe. The mother feels satisfactory, so now we have to deal with the paperwork. The woman had her license in her pocket, so she was driving herself. But what's to know? Hello, police. Is the maternity hospital bothering you? Thomas is my name. A woman was brought in today. Turns out the investigator was already on his way. All we had to do was wait. Thomas was just hanging up when there was a knock on the door. Yes, Thomas. Yes, come in. I just called yours. Turns out Eva, that's the woman's name, caught her husband with his mistress. Couldn't think of anything better to do than jump behind the wheel and drive off. The husband tried to stop her, but failed. Yeah, well, it started raining and she skidded. And here's the result. How is she? Well, she's all right now. 2 boys, all right. What's gonna happen now? Well, she didn't hurt anybody. She's alive. So it's just a formality on our end. True, after the car is examined for special damage. Thomas raised his eyebrows in surprise. But that is the order. Here, sign it. Thomas signed the papers, and the officer of the law left. Yes, their maternity hospital had been in the midst of some strange happenings lately. The rounds weren't due to start for another hour. Thomas made himself a coffee and turned on the TV. The news was on. Some big businessman had been killed. He already wanted to switch it up. He didn't like the kind of news he saw on the screen. Something familiar flashed. Journalists were trying to interview the dead man's mother. Thomas gasped. Charlotte. He sat down. The announcer was talking about how this businessman was supposed to hold a high position in the capital and also become the regional head of their region. He called it machinations of competitors and said the case was under special control. At the end, he mentioned that the deceased was survived by his mother, a formerly famous ballerina, and his daughter, who hardly ever appears in public. Rumor has it that the businessman's daughter is very ill, so she spends more time abroad. I wonder if she will be able to continue her treatment now that she has lost her father's support. Thomas even pounded his fist on the table. Those bastards. Nothing sacred. He was very upset. He had hoped that the girl would be okay and that her father would take in his granddaughter. That's just the way it is. Thomas, we have a problem there. that there's that woman again after the accident that she refuses to feed her children. And the reason said that she doesn't need the children. She can't raise them alone. Thomas sighed. What kind of day is this? One thing after another was just coming down. He walked out of the office, headed for the room. A nurse was walking beside him. She was a young red-headed girl. She was on duty a lot, and Thomas knew she was taking part-time jobs because her mother was sick. The nurse's name was Jen. She was a smart and executive girl. Thomas, I brought the kids. The girls came with me. Everybody wanted to see the first mother-child reunion. There might not have been one. I go in, and she turns her back to the wall. I said, Mommy, your sons are for dinner. She's crying. I see her shoulders flinch, and she says, take them away. I can't take them. I can't pull them out. I say both ways. You'll see, but she won't take it. Of course, this was not the first time in Thomas's practice. He was always worried. It was one thing when some drunkard refused. It's quite another to have normal parents. And this, of course, was a special case. Who knows what really happened? Did the woman get everything right? What was the father of the twins? Good afternoon. My name is Thomas. I'm your attending physician. The woman looked at him with tearful eyes. It was you who saved me. Why? Well, there you go. What do you think I shouldn't have? No, I don't have to. That's an interesting decision. That is, to fulfill your own stupid desires, you decided to let others suffer. She looked at him in surprise. Actually, she thought that the doctor would begin to persuade her, to calm her down. And he came and scolded. No, but... What but you have a terrible tragedy. Your husband cheated on you. But it means he is not your man, and because of the betrayal of not your man, to betray others completely helpless. I'm sorry, that's out of line. She wanted to say something, but the doctor raised his hand. No, you listen to me. You're getting out of the hospital. You'll suffer mentally, physically a little while you heal. And then what? Then you'll realize what you've done. It'll be too late. The rejects, who are not the children of all kinds of immoral people, are immediately taken away. And believe me, they will be very wonderful to live with a new family. And you won't be able to live a normal life anymore. And even if you meet another decent man, you will not be happy. Because no decent man would get in touch with someone like you. Are you afraid to raise your children? You're right to give them up. Others will raise them. Don't worry about it. And you just sit there and whine. Thomas saw the woman's stunned eyes. He knew he overreacted, but he couldn't stop. This was not a normal day. He left the room and headed for his office. The nurses parted fearfully. Never in their lives had they seen Thomas so loud, so angry. After his rounds, he went home. All appointments made for once to be on time and not, as usual, at night. The weather was fine, and Thomas decided to take a walk. Wait. A man stepped toward him from around the corner. Thomas stopped. Who are you? I beg your pardon. You're the doctor from the maternity hospital. A doctor, you know. A woman was brought in 2 days ago after an accident. She absolutely does not want to see me. Tell me, how is she as children? The young man was very exhausted. His eyes were sunken, his hands were shaking. So you're the man who cheated on his pregnant wife. He put his head down. Yes, I am. Only it's not like that. I mean, it is. But I didn't mean to. He looked up at him. Tell me, please, how did they? Thomas sighed. The man is decent. Dressed well, just nervous. Something told Thomas it wasn't that simple. Why else would he be so nervous? Let's have some coffee. When was the last time you ate? What kind of food? I don't care about food. I just don't know what to do. For some reason, that's what Thomas thought. No, he's not going to make it home on time again. Well, maybe he'll be able to glue together what's already broken. What's your name? Tyler. There's a nice cafe across the street. Let's go. Yeah. Okay, sure, let's go. They sat down at a table, and Thomas said, order yourself a hot meal. You're making yourself sick. Yes, I am. Tyler, in that case, I won't talk to you. The man sighed, ordered, then grinned. You're like my wife. First you eat, then you talk. She's a good one. She's wonderful. She's the best. What did you, Tyler, waving your hand at, you know? Of course, you know what I'm talking about. It's hard to carry one baby and then have two at the same time. No, we were glad, very glad, even though the pregnancy happened a little earlier than we had planned. Everything was fine at first. You don't think so? I always tried to help Betty, but it's been hell for the last 3 months. Sometimes I thought Betty was going crazy. She could spend hours crying for hours and hours nagging me about how I put my mug wrong, how I put my shoelaces in my shoes wrong, how my cologne made her sick, how we needed a divorce. Because no one could love someone as ugly as she was. I've tried to talk to her, tried to convince her that I'm not, that I love her, but it's all useless. I've read 1,000 articles about hormone play. I understood that all of this will pass, but I kept trying to escape to work at every opportunity, sometimes just to get some sleep. A new girl came to work for us. She was all, how can I tell you, a chick figure, makeup, sense of humor. We got along with her kind of easy. Don't get any ideas. We just chatted. But I could see that she liked me. And I have to admit, I liked that. After the perpetually disgruntled and resentful Betty, Carol was like balm to my soul. That day Betty threw such a tantrum that I left the house in the evening and decided that I would spend the night at work, thanks to my own office there. And I did not know that Carol was still there without knowing that she was delayed. She knew right away. She came to me 5 minutes later with a bottle of whiskey. Tyler, you need a drink. And I knew that was what I needed. We had a few drinks, and she sat down next to me and stroked my cheek. I lost my head plus the whiskey. And Betty apparently realized that she had offended me. She really said some real nasty things then and went to my place of work. I don't know why. Maybe to talk. Maybe something else. She caught us. I ran after her. I didn't want to. I love my wife. I love our children. I do not want to be without them. I'm well aware that I'm guilty, that it's almost impossible to forgive such a thing. She won't even listen to me. I'll accept whatever she decides, just as long as she would let me see the boys, help them. Thomas looked at this young fool and realized if he didn't help him, these two people who apparently love each other would just lose each other. Yes, Tyler had done you wrong. There was nothing left to be done. Yes, I understand everything. I'm ready to kill myself like they did. Well, there wasn't much good when they brought me in. Honestly, I heard some doctor performed a miracle operation. Oh, come on. It was a tricky operation, but it wasn't anything mind-blowing. So you're the doctor. Doctor, thank you. Thank you very much. You're welcome. The boys are strong. Good. Your wife's a little tougher, but she's doing well too. Isn't she? That Tyler went to see him. You see, she's totally shattered, mentally confused, depressed. As you can imagine, there are consequences. What am I supposed to do? How do I talk to her? You know what? Try writing a letter. Explain everything and how much you love her, and I'll pass it on. I don't know if she'll read it, but it's worth a try. Tyler was waiting for him at the hospital gate this morning. Here's fruit, diapers, nipples for Betty to eat. I read what I could bring. Here's everything I bought. And here's the letter. Thank you. You're welcome for now. I'll pass it on. Thomas changed his clothes and went into Betty's room. She was standing by the window. Hello, Betty. Hello. He was there at the gate. And then Thomas realized that he could see the gate through the window of the ward. There was no point in hiding anything. Yes, that was your husband. We spoke to him yesterday. I'm not going to prove anything to you, but I will tell you that in family problems, it's always two people to blame. Tyler asked me to give you this too. He put the envelope on the nightstand and put the bag next to the bed, waiting for Betty to pick it up or throw it away. He just walked out. Betty looked at the letter, hesitating to take it in her hands. Finally, she overcame herself and took it. She held it in her hands for a long time. She opened it and began to read. She paused several times to wipe her tears, to get a drink. Then she lay down, putting the sheet under her pillow. Half an hour later, a nurse appeared. She brought her roommate's babies to feed. The nurse was on her way out when she heard. "And mine? What about me?" It was Jen. She even stumbled, then quickly turned around and said, "Just a minute now, I'll bring them to me in one go. They just don't fit, all of them. If you take them a little further away from each other, they start screaming right away." Betty smiled faintly. 10 minutes later, she flushed, trying to feed her 2 sons at the same time. It was not going well. And Nadia, smiling, tried to help her. "Take your time. They're not going anywhere." 2 days later, Betty and her sons were discharged. Thomas went out to see her off. "Thank you. And I'm sorry." "It's okay, Betty. The important thing is that everything is as it should be. Have you talked to Tyler?" "No, I can't yet. Maybe later." "Where are you going now?" "To visit a friend for a few days. I called her. She's expecting us." Thomas was about to offer to call a cab, but the door swung open and a whole mountain of balloons literally piled into the lobby. Betty stepped back, then opened her eyes wide. It was Tyler. In one hand, he held a huge bouquet of balloons. In the other, an equally huge bouquet of flowers. He was elbowing a bag, and he looked completely disheveled. He stopped, stared at Betty. They both looked at each other and were silent. At that moment, Jean brought out 2 blue packages. She assessed the situation at once and stepped boldly toward Tyler. "Accept Daddy's new addition." At first, all the balloons flew up to the ceiling. The package and the bouquet were picked up by Thomas. Jean placed the babies in Tyler's arms. He looked into one envelope, into the other, and sniffed his nose. Betty walked over to him. Tyler shifted his gaze to her. "Thank you. Thank you." To see them off, everyone went out. There was a white limousine at the entrance to the maternity hospital. Betty exclaimed, "Tyler, are you crazy? Mad with happiness?" The car drove away those who had almost done more foolish things out of their own stupidity. Of course, it was unlikely that Tyler would have let Betty leave the children behind, maybe even taken them himself. But who knows what would have happened next. Thomas Jasmine, of the 7th, decided to give birth herself. "She's early. I'm running now." He went back into the building and almost ran to the 7th. Jasmine had just turned 18. Also, she was very petite, but the baby, on the other hand, was large. She was waiting for a scheduled C-section, but apparently something went wrong. Thomas left the hospital after 8. Jasmine did give birth, and she did it herself. It was a quick delivery, but it was all right. He was tired. As of tomorrow, Thomas is on vacation. He and Abby finally decided to go out. He went to the store and bought a cake and a bottle of wine. They had been planning for so long. This vacation had taken so long to get their vacations to coincide. As he came out of the store, he saw an elderly grandmother. She was sitting a little ways away selling asters. He could see that he had once given such amber from his garden a long time ago. They were very young then, and practically beggars. And Thomas then climbed into some vegetable garden in the private sector and just picked a whole armful of these flowers. He walked up to his grandmother. "Are you selling them?" "Fresh ones are cheap. They'll fall off anyway. At least they'll bring some joy to someone and me." The old woman's eyes were very bright, as if they were looking deep into my soul. Thomas even wondered to himself, "Wow, she must be in her 90s, and her eyes looked as if she were young. Let me take it all back to my wife. Yeah, she loves those real, not store-bought berries. She'll love 'em for sure." He was walking down the street and smiling at who knows what. Just everything is fine. Everything, absolutely everything. Betty will be sure to make up with Tyler and raise their boys. Even that lanky Beau Jasmine will make a good father. And he and Abby would be sure to go somewhere. He knew Abby wanted to take a tour of the countryside, of all the old places where there was almost no civilization. Knew and why, but he pretended he just liked the idea. In fact, Abby had been dreaming of finding some grandmother for a long time. She didn't count on anything. She didn't think that the grandmother would run her hands over and Abby would have a baby. More like the opposite. She has to hear that nothing will happen because she can't, because she's too old, and then she can move on with her life, having buried all hope. Other people live their lives in some way, and the hope did not let her live peacefully at all. Have you come to terms with it, Thomas? Hardly, but yes. He would never leave Abby because she couldn't give birth to him, especially since it was a huge fault of his as well. But even if it wasn't, it still wasn't. They were like one, and he knew exactly what they would be, for better or for worse. And here was Thomas's house, crouched on a bench and stared at his windows. The lights were burning in them, and they were waiting for him there. How good it felt to know that. Good evening, Thomas. He turned around. Charlotte was standing next to him. Thomas jumped up. Charlotte, hello. How did you come to be here? Only now he noticed the black Jeep, next to which stood the young man who had given him the envelope the other day. Charlotte was still wearing black, but now her clothes were more modern. I came to say goodbye, to say thank you. I'm leaving this city, and I won't be coming back. She looked around longingly. I'm so sorry for your loss. I heard about what happened. Thank you. Where are you going? I'm going to see Elizabeth, my granddaughter. She's in treatment right now. And you know, the doctors say that if she stays at their clinic every year, they can keep her for a few more years. Well, you know, I would give anything for every extra day of my life for my little girl. He understood, of course. He understood everything. Charlotte continued. I sold everything here, and I don't regret a thing. My little girl only needs me now, and I would do anything to keep her looking at the world through her eyes for as long as possible. Goodbye, Thomas. She turned around and went to her car. But Thomas stopped her. Excuse me, Charlotte, how is your great-granddaughter? Where is she? Charlotte stood still for a moment, then turned around. She smiled. She's all right. Thomas, she'll be all right now. Go home. Your wife's waiting. She's worried. She got in the car, and Thomas headed for the driveway. I wonder why she thought his wife was waiting for him. Then he smiled to himself. What's not to understand? The evening he is on his way home from work. Clearly, since this apartment was given to him by Charlotte, she knows where the windows are located. The lights are on. Everything just makes sense. Thomas felt a kind of lift. It was good that Elizabeth was alive, that Charlotte was doing so well. He was genuinely worried about their family. May all be well with the little girl. But what's to worry about now? Julian isn't. The girl can live with her mother. How long will it last? God willing. It will be as long as possible. He climbed the last flight of stairs and froze in front of the door. There was a baby carrier standing in his apartment, and in it someone was rummaging. Thomas rushed forward. In the baby carrier was a baby not more than a month old. Everything was very expensive, beautiful. Thomas pressed the bell and knelt down. What was that? He held out his hand. There was a box next to it. Thomas opened it and immediately understood everything. In the box was a thick stack of money and jewelry. One of them he remembered exactly. Had it been worn on Charlotte's finger when they had met? The door swung open. Abby stared at him with huge eyes, then shifted her gaze to the child. Thomas, what is it? Abby, I found this under the door. Thomas, what are you sitting here for? The baby's going to catch a cold. Go home at once. We'll deal with it later. She picked up the carrier. Thomas everything else, and they quickly went into the apartment. The little one was frightened. Thomas looked at his wife at a loss. Abby, how did you know it was a girl? How do you know? Now she was looking at him in surprise. You could tell right away. She put the carrier on the couch and began to gently unbutton it. Now we'll let you out. Now we'll feed you. Thomas just didn't recognize Abby. It felt like she was spinning babies in her arms every day. She quickly turned the girl around. And you're all dried out, and the formula bottle is still warm. Someone put you here just now. Thomas looked the note. He held out his hand. Basically, Thomas already knew what it would say, but he read it aloud. Thomas and Abby, it has been a very difficult decision for me. So difficult that I have come to your house. I have come several times with Lucy, but I have taken her away each time. I will keep the girl today. My granddaughter doesn't have long to live. The only reason I'm still in this world is because she really needs me. As soon as she's gone, I'll be gone too. I don't want Lucy to spend the rest of her life in an orphanage, or with people who will supposedly love her just because of her inheritance. We consulted with Elizabeth for a long time, shed a lot of tears, and decided that you could make our little girl happy. We don't want her to get used to us. I realized love, and then I was left alone in this world. It's too cruel. It's better for us to suffer, especially since we're good at it. When we're all gone, our notary will look for you. But that's all later. In the side pocket of all the girls' papers, there's also the guardianship decisions to make you guardians. Money is evil, but you can do a lot with it. Please understand us. Do you love her? She is beautiful. Thomas looked up at his wife. Abby was crying at the same time, cradling the baby in her arms. Thomas, this is such a gift to us. We've dreamed for so long, gone through so much. Abby, don't say anything, nothing. I won't give her to anyone anyway. I'm telling you that right off the bat. Thomas smiled. That's not what I mean. Tomorrow we have to buy everything we need. Abby walked over to him and sat down next to him. Thomas took the baby from her arms. She looked at him intently with blue eyes and suddenly smiled. Thomas smiled back. Well, they hugged each other and sat like that for a long time until Lucy fell asleep in his arms. At Thomas's, Abby made a temporary bed out of the chair and then sent Thomas off into the night to look for baby food. Abby, honestly, I don't really understand why you're bringing the girl to us. She already knows too much for her age. Abby is confused. Well, all children have tutors before they go to school. The woman who was that tutor smiled. But this isn't about you. You really don't need it. She reads perfectly, counts, and in general, the level of her training is such that a girl can safely go to second grade. So what should we do? Do what? Take a rest. Go to the country by the sea. Let the child relax, and you will start school on September 1. Abby came out from the tutor, firmly holding Lucy's hand. Well, what shall we do, daughter? Lucy looked at her slyly and said, I don't know, but I think we should listen to Samantha and go to the sea. Jessica and Mia have been twice and I haven't been once. Abby smiled at the trip to the sea. Before the first class, they had a trip planned. True, everything was kept secret from the girl. Otherwise, just no one would have a life. Lucy was tireless in her questions. Well, I guess we better go over to Dad's then. We're just passing by his hospital. Thomas had been chief physician of the hospital for a year when the previous chief physician retired. It wasn't even a question of who to assign to Daddy. With Thomas at Lucy's, there was a special kind of reverent love. She was terribly fond of visiting. At his workplace, she loved it when she'd let her father look through the glass into the nursery where the babies were. You know, Daddy, when I grow up, I'm going to be a doctor too. The only one who treats the very little ones that are just born. Of course you will, if you want to. You're so smart, I'm sure you'll do just fine. They entered the hospital. Good afternoon, Abby. Hello, Lucy. Abby nodded with a smile and Lucy walked over to Jean. Hello, my daddy, where Jean sat down. Sunshine. He is in surgery, but it will be over soon. You wait for Daddy in the study. Lucy importantly nodded, and she and Mom went to Thomas' office. In about 15 minutes he showed up. Well, there's my girls. And I have news for you. They let me go on vacation, but only for 2 weeks. But we have enough time to splash around in the sea. Lucy squealed and threw herself on her father's neck. Daddy, Daddy. How wonderful. He pulled her away from him. But what about the preparations for school? Oh, Daddy, no problem at all. Samantha said I was too clever as it was, and I needed more rest than study. Abby couldn't help laughing. Thomas looked at her in surprise, but the meaning was about the same. In slightly different words, though. Thomas stroked his daughter's hair. Then I don't understand why you are still here and not buying outfits. Lucy looked at her mother in horror. Mom, what if we don't have time to buy something? Then we have to go straight to Thomas, Daddy. Then we have to go, Mom. Abby answered, of course. How could a fashionable girl like you go without new outfits? Lucy really was a terrible fashionista. She was 6 years old and knew perfectly well what didn't go with what. Abby sometimes looked at her and wondered. The girl had an innate sense of taste. When they finally arrived at the sea, Lucy immediately put on her new swimsuit and stomped impatiently. Mommy, Daddy, come on, let's go all the way to the sea. They laughed and hurried as fast as they could, so that they didn't take the whole sea. Lucy was already splashing and playing in the sand. Abby waited. Now her daughter would ask for food. And then, finally, this busy day would be over. They're pretty tired, to be honest. Only from Lucy, as always, the energy was booming. Suddenly, Abby felt someone staring at her back. She could just physically feel the stare. Abby slowly turned around. No one there. Only the door of one of the stalls was swinging. So urgent to rest, urgent sleep. It wouldn't be long before she shifted. She looked around once more, but there were only a few people left on the beach, and they were all minding their own business. She didn't say anything to Thomas, especially since she and Lucy were getting ready to go to the hotel. Aren't you tired? Abby looked at her daughter with a smile. Oh, Mommy, I don't know. I guess I am. It turns out, resting can be tired too. The girl didn't even finish her dinner, didn't even flip through a book. She fell asleep in the chair. Abby was fast asleep too. Thomas, on the other hand, couldn't sleep. I guess it was the excitement of the flight. He went out to the balcony. God, it's beautiful. The resort never seemed to sleep. Not as many people as during the day, of course, but still there were. He glanced around the grounds in front of the hotel. There was a couple walking, and in the distance, there was a woman sitting at a table, more like a grandmother in an armchair. Next to her is a large man. He was about to leave. As the old woman looked at him, Thomas froze. A chill ran down his spine. He quickly returned to the room, threw on a t-shirt, put on shorts. Abby raised his head. Thomas, where are you going? Sleep. I can't sleep. Must be the jet lag. I'm going for a walk. Okay, but not for long. Abby rolled onto her side and closed her eyes again. Thomas walked out of the hotel and headed straight for the old lady. When he sat down next to her, the old lady turned around. Hello, Thomas. Hello, Charlotte. She held up her hand to Thomas. Don't be frightened. I swear to you, our meetings are completely coincidental. We thought we'd see the world one last time. When I saw you this afternoon, I was so happy to see you. How are you, Charlotte? Thomas could feel himself relaxing a little, what he'd been thinking about as he walked the distance from the room to this table. Everything is as it should be. Elizabeth I buried almost 2 years ago, and it's like God is mocking me. See, he's taking me in pieces. I guess he wants to torture me. She nodded at her feet. Don't ask about me, Thomas. You ask about Lucy. Or does she have a different name? No, not another name. Lucy, what can I tell you? You've seen everything. We're going to school this year. The tutor refused to tutor her. She says she can go to 2nd grade anyway. Charlotte smiled. And Julian was the same way. He knew everything by himself. Learned to read by himself at 4. She's a lot like him. Well, Thomas, what else? Oh, I don't know right away. She likes to run around like a child. I don't think she ever gets tired. Although there is one thing Lucy must have gotten from you. She is such a fashionista. She loves new outfits, and she always knows what to wear. Abby says it's very rare for young children. The old lady swung right in. The man, in whom Thomas recognized the faithful guard, handed the old woman a handkerchief. Thomas, yes, Charlotte Thomas. And you and Abby, are you? I know what you mean now. Abby and I love Lucy in a way no one probably ever does. Or rather, we've long forgotten that she's not our own. She's our very own. Our very own. That's good. That's good. I am calm. I purposely did not try to find out how my girl lives. I was afraid I couldn't stand it, that I would want to hug her. I'll leave tomorrow morning and go away, so as not to disturb your rest. I am calm now. Everything is all right. She made a sign to the man, and he, with a nod to Thomas, wheeled the chair in front of him toward the hotel. Thomas got up after about 5 minutes too, and went to his room. Abby was awake. She was looking at Thomas with huge eyes full of tears. Was it her? She's Lucy's grandmother. Went and hugged her. Yeah, that was her. What are you so worried about? She's leaving in the morning. She wants to take our girl away from us. No, Abby, she didn't think she'd meet us here. But she's glad, because she knows Lucy's doing well. Thomas, you're telling the truth. You're not lying to me. I'm telling you the truth. Lucy's mother is gone for almost 2 years, and Charlotte decided to see the world. While still in this world, she's in a wheelchair, did you notice? Yes, I saw Abby, as if she had calmed down a bit. I may be selfish now, but I wish she would go away. They went to bed, and Thomas thought it would be right to give at least some picture of Lucy. Charlotte let her have it. He fell asleep with the thought that he would do so in the morning. In the morning, he took one picture. Lucy loved to take pictures and generally said she would have a real portfolio, and went looking for one. Charlotte. Well, of course, if she hadn't already left. He was just coming down the lobby when he saw that same male security guard with the suitcases. Excuse me, do you remember me? The man nodded his head and looked at Thomas. I've got a picture here. What's the matter with you? Thomas stood holding the picture of his daughter and didn't understand why the guard had those eyes. Charlotte died tonight. When we got back, she already knew what it was going to be. That's why she sent me away until morning. Said she was feeling fine and very sleepy. Early in the morning I found her. She was smiling, you know. Thomas quietly lowered himself into the chair that stood next to him. The man sat down next to him. Seeing my granddaughter. It was perhaps her most recent wish. She had granted it yesterday, and there was nothing to keep her here any longer. I'm sorry, but we have to go. Thomas stood up, holding out his hand to the man. Good luck to you. He returned the handshake and left. Half an hour later, they were sitting in the room for breakfast. Abby decided to have breakfast on the balcony, while Lucy, after a quick nibble, went to her room to watch TV and wait for time for her parents to go with her to the sea. Thomas, I was told by Lucy today about a strange dream she had. I don't really believe it, but it seems to have something to do with the appearance of her grandmother. What was the dream? Thomas was absent-mindedly stirring a spoonful of coffee that had long since gone cold. She says she dreamt of a very kind old woman. She hugged Lucy, said something, and began to walk away. She walked on, waving to Lucy and repeating that she would be all right. Charlotte died tonight almost immediately after we spoke. Fulfilled her last wishes to look at Lucy and make sure she was doing well. Abby looked up at her. How strange and scary. But you know, as bad as it sounds, I'm relieved now. No one is a danger to us now. No one will try to take our little girl. Thomas understood Abby's feelings perfectly. He probably would have too, if he hadn't known Charlotte. Telling his wife that the old woman had completely kept her word was pointless. Now a new life would begin for them. Or rather, life will simply continue, but without the past pages. You cannot turn around and just live and love. Well, girls, let's go swimming, shall we? Lucy showed up right away. Yes, Daddy, yes to the bath.